Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly classified historical dossier that completely redefines the concept of psychological warfare. I want you to step back in time with me and picture this. It's 1968. You're deep in the dense, suffocatingly humid jungles of Vietnam. The air is thick, the tension is absolutely palpable, and you're about to witness one of the most covert and terrifying military operations in modern history unfold in real time.
Imagine the scene. A Viet Cong soldier spots his target, raises his legendary AK-47, and pulls the trigger, but instead of the familiar crack of a bullet heading down range, something unimaginable happens. The entire rifle violently disintegrates right in his hands. It literally bursts outward like a fragmentation grenade right next to his face. Now, for his surviving squad mates, the immediate thought is, okay, this was a terrible manufacturing fluke, right? A defect. But what happens when your absolute most reliable tool suddenly becomes a lethal trap? Because, spoiler alert, this was no accident.
That explosion? It generated a staggering 250,000 pounds per square inch of pressure inside the chamber. This wasn't some random factory error. This was a deliberate, highly calculated plot cooked up by the CIA and the covert operatives of MACVSOG. That's the Studies and Observations Group. It was originally dubbed Project Eldest Son, though it later went by names like Italian Green and Pole Charge. And here's the kicker. This operation wasn't just about eliminating enemy fighters. It was meticulously engineered to weaponize paranoia.
Section 1. An unstoppable supply line. Let's rewind a bit to 1967.
So by 1967, U.S. commanders were dealing with a massive headache. They were running these intense bombing campaigns all along the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and Cambodia, basically trying to sever the enemy's supply chain. But despite dropping all those bombs, the reality on the ground was starkly different. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army were still getting a continuous, highly reliable supply of Soviet and Chinese arms. We're talking specifically about the ubiquitous Chinese Type 56 and Soviet AK-47 rifles, plus 82mm mortar systems. And these weapons, they were legendary for a reason. You could drag them through the mud, bury them in swamp water, and they would still fire flawlessly.
The sheer futility of it all was just staggering. Conventional bombing simply couldn't stop the flow of these incredibly durable weapons. This constant, infuriating dilemma led Colonel John K. Singlaub and the MACV SOG operatives to ask a pretty radical question. They knew ground interdiction wasn't really realistic. So they thought, well, what if we didn't stop the ammo from reaching them? What if, instead, we made the enemy completely terrified to even pull the trigger?
Section 2. Engineering the perfect trap. To pull this off, ordnance experts holed up at a secret facility in Okinawa. They zeroed in on the exact technical specs of the ammunition the enemy relied on most, those 7.62 by 39mm Soviet and Chinese rifle rounds and the 82mm mortar shells. The goal was to engineer a trap that looked exactly like the real deal, but behaved, well, very, very differently.
Let me walk you through the absolute surgical precision of this process. Step 1. The experts would meticulously unseat the bullet from an authentic Soviet bloc cartridge. Step 2. They'd empty out the standard smokeless powder and swap it for a compound called PETN. Now, PETN is a highly sensitive, incredibly powerful high explosive. Then, step 3, they would seamlessly reseat the bullet so it looked totally untouched. They performed this exact same surgery on the 82mm mortar rounds too. It was essentially an undetectable bomb, hiding right there in plain sight. And this right here perfectly illustrates why it worked so catastrophically well. The bursting threshold for an AK-47's forged steel receiver is roughly 45,000 to 50,000 psi. But remember that number we talked about earlier? When that substituted PETN explosive fired, it generated roughly 250,000 psi. That is over 5 times the pressure the steel could handle. So upon pulling the trigger, the rifle didn't just jam up, it suffered a catastrophic receiver breach. And for the mortars, the altered rounds were rigged to detonate the microsecond they hit the bottom of the firing tube. This caused an immediate subterranean explosion that would completely obliterate the mortar crew.
Section 3. The stealth insertion and the rule of one. Okay, so they have the rigged ammo, but now they had to actually get it into enemy hands. So U.S. Special Forces and Green Berets were sent out on these clandestine reconnaissance patrols deep into the jungle to hunt down hidden enemy ammo caches. But here is the fascinating part. These operatives were given a strict mandate. They were strictly forbidden from replacing entire crates of ammunition. And if you think about it, this makes total logical sense. If a whole box blew up, the enemy would instantly know, okay, this is an American sabotage operation.
Instead, they brilliantly masked the operation using what became known as the rule of one. The Green Berets were instructed to plant just one single sabotaged bullet into a magazine, or one sabotaged shell into a box of 20. The logic is brilliantly sinister. If 99 authentic rounds work perfectly, and just the 100th round creates a catastrophic failure, the enemy isn't going to blame a covert U.S. operation. No, they're going to blame poor quality control from their own Chinese or Soviet factories. It was the absolute perfect cover.
Section 4. Poisoning the mind.
Now we get to see how this builds from isolated explosions into a full-blown psychological cascade. To really magnify the panic, the CIA launched this multi-pronged gaslighting campaign. They actively planted forged Viet Cong documents complaining about, quote, defective Chinese ammunition. They broadcasted radio rumors whispering about low-grade factory supplies being sent to the front lines. And man, the strategy worked flawlessly. Paranoia spread through the enemy ranks like wildfire. Soldiers actually started inspecting every single round with flashlights. It got so bad that entire squads were taking perfectly good crates of ammunition and chucking them into rivers out of sheer suspicion. The CIA managed to plant a seed of doubt so deep that every time a soldier rested his cheek against his rifle, he had to wonder, is pulling this trigger going to be my last act on Earth?
The sheer scale of this deployment was staggering. Before Project Eldest Son was finally shut down, and by the way, that only happened because a U.S. infantry unit accidentally retrieved a sabotaged magazine and got injured, realizing what was going on. But before that, the operatives successfully seeded over 11,000 rifle rounds and 2,000 mortar shells directly into the enemy's supply chain. That's thousands of ticking time bombs just silently waiting in the enemy's hands.
Section 5. The Historical Legacy.
The enduring lesson of Project Eldest Son goes way, way beyond the jungles of Vietnam. Honestly, it's a masterclass in psychological leverage that applies universally. We're talking about how this applies to conflict, geopolitical strategy, and even competitive business today.
I want you to think about this powerful, core strategic takeaway from the dossier, and just let the devastating weight of it sink in. Destroying an enemy's physical tools only forces them to replace them. Destroying their faith in their tools cripples their ability to act altogether. It wasn't that 250,000 psi explosion that broke the supply line. It was the weaponized paranoia. It was that complete erosion of confidence that paralyzed them. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to consider. Think about the physical and digital tools that you and I rely on every single day. How does this concept of weaponized paranoia apply to modern information warfare? If an opponent wanted to cripple us today, would they bother attacking our infrastructure? Or would they just subtly destroy our faith in the technology we blindly trust? It is a pretty chilling question, and it shows just how relevant the lessons of Project Eldest Son remain today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning what you trust, and keep learning.